I think we are good to start now, right?
Yes, yes, we have the
Okay.
full plan. Mustain, if
Okay,
we
so
can have the video, just to make sure that we're there.
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, good. Fantastic.
let's start now. Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining us today. I'm Sabra, and on behalf of the Asia Democracy Network, I'm happy to welcome all of you to this important discussion on election timing and institutional reforms, a constitutional debate. So we're co-hosting this with the Sydney Policy and Analysis Center, and I really appreciate our panelists and all of you for being part of this discussion today. So I think Bangladesh is at a crucial moment. There's a big debate right now about whether elections should happen soon or wait until reforms are in place. So this brings up critical questions about democracy, governance, and accountability. But most importantly, what's at stake here isn't just politics, it's about the people of Bangladesh and the right to a fair and transparent election. At ADN, we believe free and fair elections and strong institutions are key to public trust and long-term stability. So no matter where this debate leads, what really matters is keeping the people's voices front and center and ensuring accountability. So we have a fantastic panel today who will break all of this down for us. The webinar is being live streamed and recorded as well, so feel free to share it with others who might be interested. Our moderator, Jyoti Rahman, director, SPAC, will introduce our speakers and lead this conversation. I'm looking forward to a great discussion, and thank you again for being here. Jyoti, over to you.
Thank you, Sabra, and welcome to the conversation. Before I go any further, let me pay my respect to martyrs of the July uprising and the 15, 16-year-long struggle of Bangladesh people against unelected governments. Without their sacrifice, we probably would not be having this conversation today. I would also like to acknowledge the First Nation people of all the lands around the world. Today we have a very experienced, very distinguished panel with us. We have, in no particular order, or the order that I see them on my video screen. So we've got Barrister Rashna Imam. She is a lawyer based in Dhaka, and she has been very vocal on against disinformation and misinformation peddled against Bangladesh since the uprising, since before. We've got Dr. Shamaru Mirza. She is a scientist, but also an activist working with women from culturally diverse communities here in Australia, but also working with diaspora communities for raising awareness, for pushing pro-democracy causes. We've got Rubaiyat Sarwar. He's a development practitioner in Dhaka with a lot of field experience across the country. And that gives him a unique insight to the pulse of the people, so to speak. And finally, we've got Mr. Mustain Zahir, long-term human rights activist in Dhaka, and most recently, member of the Constitutional Reform Commission. And it's to Mustain that I would actually pose the first question. But before I do that, the way the conversation is going to go is I would pose a question. Each question will have a lead respondent. And they would have about five minutes or so to answer. And then I would go down and ask all the other panelists, what you have heard, can you make a comment? And those comments would be probably about a minute or two. And I will be pretty brutal, pretty ruthless about cutting people short because we want to hear from everybody. We've got a lot of questions, okay? So lead question, 5 minutes, comments 1 minute, then next question. Hopefully we'll have some time at the end for a question from the audience. Okay, so with that, we start with Mustain, who is based in Dhaka. And the question to Mustain, So you were in the Constitution Reform Commission, and that has now gone to the next body, which is the Consensus Commission, and we are in the process of actually getting to the nitty-gritty of reforms. So what have these commissions proposed, and what is going on? So tell us about the reforms that are on the card, and how do you think they're going to proceed?
Thank you, Jyoti, for inviting me, and also from my side, a little apology that I couldn't make it on the first date due to other engagement. I really appreciate that all of you adjusted with that inconvenience. And the current state of the reform or the discussions and the debate that is going on in Bangladesh is for me, somehow a bit skewed, I would say, because we are discussing how we can have early elections. And in order to actually go to that point, what are the things that we need to do and what are the things that we can actually push aside? This should not have been the case. In my personal opinion, I would actually argue that this is a very unique moment that we are passing in the history of our nations. And this time of opportunity may not come even in the next few decades or even century. And after 50 years of our independence, we all now agree, and there is no actually point of denying that, the country, the institutions, the political arrangements that we have did not really deliver on the promises due to which we fought this independent war and subsequently different spells of democratic struggle that we had to actually continue, and lots of countless lives blood and sacrifice. But again, time and again, what we have seen is that just to hold an election, the incumbent tried always to actually somehow manipulate it. They were not actually very happy to go to the elections and accept the outcome of what people really mandate. These are the things that we have been facing. But what is unique in the last 15 years is we have seen a full-blown authoritarian fascist regime with the support of a regional hegemon. This was not the case that we have actually witnessed before. And through this process, the entire state, machineries, institutions, culture, and political landscape has actually brutally been distorted and devastated. And where Sheikh Hasina left us, it is all known. And now the question is, how do we begin with this? And there is also a very important thing that far too long, our new generation were not actually very optimistic and were not very interested about politics and the state, as a matter of fact. So I see it as a very interesting thing. Three things I try to actually differentiate. The first is, this is the time where we are seeing the generation who fought for our independence and actually gave us an identity and a nation. Those who are actually at the stage of natural replacement stage, they're all above 80 and they will be soon actually replaced by new generations. And it is the very important fact that the way they used to think about state, the way they used to think about our politics, our history, the purpose, and the values for which they actually fought, has gone through radical distortions and disjunctions. The second thing is the new generation, the way they are coming up during this replacement stage, is they will be actually the generation who will play a very pivotal and critical role in the next few decades, at least for next 3 to 4 decades. And Bangladesh is also navigating through some critical challenges because of the geopolitical issues, the Indo-Pacific regions, the competitions that we all know of, and also the climate-related issues. These are the three aspects. So the situation is very much complex, and we have this opportunity how we can actually visualize going beyond some actually very common theme that we always discuss is reforms, election commissions, some regulations, some ordinance, this kind of things. Whether we can have really a very fresh and robust start should be the beginning point of our reflections and discussions. This is where I come in. So responding to you, of course, the Constitution Commission had its limited scope of actually, terms of reference. We had to work out our own actually proposal within that. So we work basically on the substance, like what are the problems that we have with the existing constitutions, why it actually failed to contain these authoritarian tendencies, and also this kind of wholesale capture of state machineries and abuse of these state machineries, actually, extrajudicial killing and forced disappearances, torture, and whatnot. And finally, in June and July and August, we had seen actually a kind of atrocious crimes committed by all sort of state agencies and entire state machineries, and a big political actually sections of the people were actually supportive initially by supporting that kind of ideological line. So constitution may not solve all the problems, because we have cultural problems, we have political parties, those who do not actually are showing that they are proactive and interested to really reform within. We may not actually solve a lot of problems like the kind of broken police and very criminal and corrupt intelligence agencies. Constitution may not able to address a whole host of the things that we are actually handling things, but the Constitution may set a fresh beginning, can set the rules of the game. Within this framework, we can actually have better space arrangements and safeguards to protect, preserve, and cultivate a better democratic governance, balance of power, institutional checks and balance, representation from the communities that are still actually kind of falling behind. And also, we wanted to emphasize on the institutional arrangement to actually kind of address most of the problems that we thought are involved with actually the executive powers, the way it appoints constitutional post, the way constitutional bodies are actually our functions and their independence. So these were the overriding concerns that we had, and from our proposal, all of you, I think by this time have seen that. So if I talk about the constitution, mostly we try to do two things. One is, how can we find a balance between different branches and the organs of the state, and how we can have an institutional mechanism through which we can build a political consensus among the actors of the state, especially the positions of the opposition, so that no institutions or office can capture the state power in a manner that rest of the arrangement will become actually redundant. So this is why our NC, the concept of actually National Constitution Council actually came in. And we try to make sure that, we have also another interesting point, that all the political parties invariably actually said that we want to keep the election time in interim or caretaker government. But the devil is in the detail, which is actually how you select the chief of advisor, how you select. Nobody could come up with any actually plausible proposal or solutions. So we try to address in a manner through some kind of workings that no particular political party say if it is the treasury, where the treasury will have the kind of majority. Even if they have majority, they will have to find at least some level of participations and agreement from the oppositions. So these were the things that we actually spent a lot of time. And regarding the constitutional and other institutional arrangement, we try to make sure that the constitution reform, if it goes actually in that line, I don't know to what extent the political parties will agree, because they are now actually reviewing and reflecting on that. They will have definitely their own say. So we propose some kind of substance, but the procedural part, like how they will actually adapt to it, it could be through kind of a parliament, which is also a limited scope. And we had seen in the history of Bangladesh that I would say actually Ziaur Rahman, he did, in my opinion, actually that was a kind of moment of Second Republic. That was a radical actually restructuring of the constitutions. But this did not last. And according to the existing constitution, Ziaur Rahman's rule is actually illegal. He was he was made actually through all sort of this kind of judgments and other thing. So repeating the same course, I don't know what will be the outcome of it. The second thing is actually whether we can have some level of kind of people's participation, referendum, some kind of national charter. These are the things are being discussed, or a fresh constitutional process, which means a constituent assembly, and they actually come forward, and that will be a new beginning. In my personal opinion, that would be the best and ideal outcome, but I don't know whether the political parties are interested and they will be actually agree finally on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Musnan. This is a for a great overview. Let me just note that we have in our audience, in our part among our those present in Zoom today, as well as people watching, people who are not from Bangladesh. So this is Asian Democracy Network, and therefore, let's just keep that in mind. However, the big challenges that you have mentioned, the generational change, geopolitical transition, so to speak, or great power rivalry, climate change. These are challenges experienced by all countries in the region. So in Bangladesh, we are dealing with that in a very particular moment in our history, and as Mustain has explained, challenges are manifold. The commissions have narrowed it down to specific things that could be tackled, and now it's with the politicians and so on. So Mustain has given us a very broad brush overview of a very complex set of challenges and how we're dealing with that. I would ask the other panelists to reflect and give their comments, maybe 1 to 2 minutes, starting with Rashna.
Thank you very much, Jyoti, for that. My first comment would be not about the content of the proposals that have come out from the Reform Commission reports, but rather the process that they followed to arrive at those proposals. I'm quite nervous about the process that was followed. Honestly, it was not minimal consultation took place from what I gather, from what was visible to me from news and other sorts of media. Minimal consultation took place in arriving at these reform proposals, which might lead to a number of problems, and which is what makes me nervous. The first problem would be what the National Consensus Commission is now facing is on the proposals. So if political parties were made part of this, the consultations or part of arriving at these reform proposals, then it would have been easier to reach consensus on at least the big issues. And the other point would be implementation. Even if this government were to implement some of these reforms and then proceed with elections, the rest of the reforms, whether or not they'll be implemented, as we know during the Fakhruddin Moin caretaker government, a lot of the reforms never saw the light of the day. So that is another concern that I have, more than the content of these proposals. Moving on to the content, most of them are good. It's a matter of reaching a consensus. That will be the bigger challenge. Another problem here would be, if you look at the composition of these commissions, most of them are public intellectuals sitting in their ivory towers, arriving at these conclusions, which is another criticism that these commissions have faced time and again, that they may not be in touch with what the people want. And this is where, consultation would have played a critical role. Moving on to the constitutional reforms that my fellow panelist was talking about, I personally am of the opinion that the 1972 Constitution was not all bad. In fact, for those times, this was highly regarded. This was considered to be progressive from a rights perspective. Yes, it had its problems, but what actually caused the problem was the 17 amendments that took place subsequently. And most of these amendments, as we are all too aware, took place because of political reasons, to keep a party in power, to retain power, to essentially destroy different institutions that we've seen over the years. So it's really these amendments that, to an extent, destroyed the Constitution as opposed to how it was originally adopted. Yes, of course, it has its problem. And a Constitution is a living, breathing document. And this has to change with time, with changing needs of the people. So I don't think rewriting would be a solution. I think we need amendments, and amendments of the Constitution obviously have to be left to an elected government, as the only procedure available right now is 2/3 of a majority of the parliamentary members. So that would be my comment on the Constitution. And when we're talking about reform, too many reforms too soon would be a major mistake. Because reform, firstly, is an ongoing process. It's a trial and error thing. When we carry out some reforms, implement them, see if they're effective in addressing the problems for which they were put in place in the first place. And then if it is effective, we go on to other reforms. But if we do too much too soon, this may be counterproductive in the long run. I believe I've run out of time, so I'll restrict my comments to that. Sorry, I believe you're on mute.
I'm mute. So thanks. Thanks, Rashna. Okay, so comments about process, comment about consultation, comment about speed of reform, too much too soon, and so on. I would ask Rubaiyat and then Shamaru, both reflecting on what Mustain said, but also what Rashna had said. Rubaiyat.
Yeah, great. I think Rashnapa has powerfully expanded on the deliberation from Hussain. So I'm a systems change expert, and my works relate to systems strengthening and institutional capacity development to ensure that, let's say at the micro level, when we are trying to impart changes, these are sustained over the long term. And if I speak from that perspective, so like Rashna said, when you're building a system, consensus is important, and you do not want to do a lot at the same time. You take a theory of change approach. Okay, that's the long-term goal. And then you build the foundations block by block to reach there. The biggest challenge that Bangladesh faces is that even though, I mean, it's a very heterogeneous community, we have so much disaggregation in terms of what we believe and how we approach situations and issues that it becomes very difficult to get people onboarded on the same kind of principles. So we need to prioritize few basic systems that need to be changed. Like Hussain was also saying, like we have very breached law and order situation because the police, I mean, they're not, they're not, I would say, able to support a proper election. So also, say, for instance, we don't have the institutions like public sector and the private sector coming together to ensure that our reforms are sustained in the long term. And also, if you're talking about the generational perspective, a big challenge is that even the poll that we did in recent times is showing about 30% of the younger generation, they're apathetic about our politics. And so you don't necessarily have a buy-in from 1/3 of that generation. So, and also when we are talking about the people and the people's voices, constitutional reforms and such issues are very alien to them, and they're not part of the process. They don't really understand what it means for them. So if we're building bottom up, then we need to bring all these people together, think about the essential changes that they want, think about the power and influence of the whole stakeholders, map them, and then build a system through which you can start to deliver the long-term systemic changes with regards to institutional reform, and that can support constitutional reforms and etc. And since it's a long-term process, the political commitment and all parties buy-in is absolutely essential. So I believe I don't really see that happening now, and that should be the priority before the election happens, that there is a consensus among the parties to carry forward the reforms over the years.
Thanks, Rubaiyat. And last to Shama.
Thank you, Jyoti. I won't take that much time because I think I echo Rashna, what she said already. And I'm just going to share a very funny realization that I'm having now, that we, the urban educated class, who actually I think represent 5 to 10% at max of the population of Bangladesh, we think that we know it all. But unfortunately, more frequently, we do not reflect the voices of Mango public. I mean, all the content of the reform commissions, I think they're great, and it's in the best interest of the nation, but we should not position reform and elections against each other. That gives a very wrong message to all the people out there who fight for liberal democracy. And yeah, I think let's hear what other panelists say, and I'm going to shed more light on my own personal views when we position reforms and election against each other.
Thanks, Shama. So just to clarify to non-Bangladeshi audience, the word mango publics, what that means. So the word mango, the Bangla word for that is okay, which is, as you know, is a delicious fruit, sort of loved by all people from the monsoon Asia, okay? And, this being Ramadan, it's probably not a very good idea to talk about delicious food at this time of the day. Also means people, common people. So mango public is a term sort of used for common people, ordinary people. The fallen Awami League sort of takes its name from that word as well. So it used to be a people's party that became a despotic authoritarian regime. So there's probably some lesson in that for all of us. I would normally ask Mustain to sort of cover what he has heard, but we're not going to do that at the moment. Instead, what I would do is when it would be his turn to speak again, Mustain, maybe you could not just reflect on that specific question, but also overall what you have heard. And that would be true for all the other speakers. And with that, I'm going to go to the second question, which is, should elections proceed immediately, or do these reforms, the very important reforms that Mustain talked about, consultation and other points notwithstanding, should there be consensus on reforms first, or should we proceed to elections immediately? So I'm going to go back to Shama on that question.
Thank you, Jyoti. As I have already mentioned, that I do not see any conflict between reforms and election. Reform is a continuous process. This can happen anytime, and all the political governments just can, implement that eventually. I mean, I work for an Australian government. I have seen that all the governments proposes reforms, and the next government can implement that. And also, I mean, it's up to them whether they implement that or not, and depending on the consultation with all the stakeholders in the country. Look, taking part in the government and voting in periodic genuine elections is a well-established right according to international human rights law. Let's not position election and reforms against each other. And I repeat that because that's a very wrong message out there. And I'm not sure whether all panelists would agree with me or not, because it also echoes something that Hasina used to say. It's just like development is being replaced by reforms in the current context. And while the uprising, and let me tell you something about the uprising that happened in July. While the uprising began in July, organized under the banner of the Students Against Anti-Discrimination, please correct if I'm wrong, asking for reforms only in the quota system in government jobs. And it did significantly contribute to the political change, and that I think the biggest change that Bangladesh witnessed in recent times. And the people of Bangladesh, united from all corners of the country, joined the movement in July. And ultimately, all the stakeholders and the power players in the government had to surrender to the voice of the people, and Hasina fled. But it's also very important to understand the broader context. For the past 16 and 70 years, the government was run by one women army, and that's Sheikh Hasina. And how she did that? There was no free, fair, and inclusive election in Bangladesh. People could not vote freely. So there was no properly elected representatives in the parliament or in the government. And what happened? Opposition parties, they faced harassment, abduction, even killings. Millions of false cases were filed against dissenters. And so it was a dire situation. And that's what we call now, all the state machineries were destroyed and nothing worked, like a functional machinery. Let me tell you a story. Recently, I came back from Bangladesh and I was talking to a friend, a family friend, and she is a daughter of a very famous businessman in Bangladesh. I'm not going to disclose her identity. And she was telling me, look, Shama, I feel cheated. And I said, why do you feel cheated? and she told me that I didn't know, all these things happened before 5th August, that, all the machineries were dysfunctional, the law enforcement agencies were working for only one person, Sheikh Hasina, and I saw the development everywhere. So I didn't even know that Arnagor existed. And I was like, okay, you felt cheated now, after 5th August. Why I'm saying this story? Because of these kind of peoples, the beneficiaries, the businesswomen, businessmen, bureaucrats, even the defense forces. Hasina was in power for 15 years, and she could not, she did not hold a free and fair election so that she could retain in power forever. And that's why I think personally, because I work for human rights in Australia, I think election would be the only getaway to democracy in Bangladesh. And when we talk about reforms, we need to hear what people say. I know that Rubaiyat had conducted a survey very recently where majority do not care about constitutional reforms. Yeah, that's the reality. They want their law and order to be in order. They want employment. That's a very important issue in current Bangladesh. They want peace, and they want the social cohesion. So I have immense respect for Professor Yunus, and post 5th August, when he formed all this reforms commission, and I was really hoping that he would rather focus on the most important reform in Bangladesh that's needed, and that's rebuilding the trust among all fronts. If we don't trust each other, if we don't focus on social cohesion in the country, no reform, no amendment, no rewriting of the constitution would not work. And that's the reality. When you have a country of like millions of people, you need social cohesion, you need law and order, you need employment. Otherwise, no constitutional reform can bring back peace in the country. So let's not position reforms and elections against each other. They can coexist, but let's focus on election that would establish a people's government in the Bangladesh, and that can implement the reforms when necessary.
Thanks, Shama. So are we setting up a false dichotomy between election and reform? So Mustain, if you could respond to what you've heard from Shama, but also what you heard from other commenters about your opening exposition. Maybe a couple of minutes.
Thank you. I think we are all in agreement that Bangladesh is passing through a momentous change, and we need to seize the opportunity and do the best. But the discussion is how we get there and how we build the consensus, how we do the things right, and how we prioritize it, right? What are the things? Of course, the current government has limited tenure. They will not be able to address all sort of the problems, and they should not also try to address all sort of the problems. And so here comes the question of priority. I say, of course, there is no dichotomy, and reforms and elections are not actually mutually exclusive things. But while it comes to the question of priority, what should be the priority of the interim regime? I think we should actually discuss that. Of course, in Bangladesh, we had seen the yearning, the demands, the discussions around the institutions and institutional reforms, democratic governance, good governance, a lot of other things. But this is also the sad reality, without blaming anyone, that people also do not trust that political party will really commit to their promises and they will deliver on the substantial level of reforms. If we are denying this fact, okay, we may deny, but this is the fact. And we did not see that the political parties that we know of actually had that level of commitment, that level of eagerness, and changing the course for good. So this is why the question is recurrently coming to the surface, whether we should start where Hasina left us. Say, okay, we have the election in the next 3 months. So it will be perfectly the way where Hasina left us. Hasina left us in a state which is actually ravaged, corrupted, and collapsed systems. And if we are handing it to the next regime, whoever it may be, whether it will be a good idea or whether it will be even a manageable thing for them to actually govern the systems. So it remains an open questions, an open doubt and suspicions. I'm not actually I don't want to actually defend the commissions or myself here because it was a very particular actually area of work that we were not actually tasked to actually go through all over the country, have all sort of kind of consultations. It would actually take years. We had given actually 3 months, and we were actually tasked to actually focus on analytical things. And to the best of our understanding and knowledge, it was actually a work of a technocrats. So I don't know why people have this misunderstanding that people are from somewhere, they are out of touch and this and that thing. I mean, this level of work and this kind of work always involves that kind of people, right? So how do we know the opinion of the people? At least we try to consult with people with this limited scope of time and other thing. We went through actually a survey. We did it with the BBS. We had our actually website, 50,000 people actually provided their opinion. So what I can vouch is in terms of actually reform agenda, we tried to go to the people to the extent it was actually possible for us. Now, the question of consensus and the question of also having this broad-based, bigger dialogue so that we can actually understand and we can actually agree on is the task of the political parties. And for us, of course, we received the submissions from the political parties. We received the submission from the civil society. We received the submission from all the kind of trade bodies and other things to the extent that I could. So I don't see there is that kind of actually issue here. But say, if it is the question, we should ask to the people what they want. Let's go for a referendum and ask people whether they want the reform first or whether they want the reform to be completed and then go for elections. Are we ready to do that?
Thanks, Mustan. And then I'm going to ask Rubaiyat and Rashna to follow up comments.
No, I think I totally agree with Shahbar Rukapa on the point that election and reform should not be put aside. And the reason being that for continuity, there has to be a political commitment to reforms. And if we are not achieving that, like Rashna also said, there were amendments that were being done relentlessly by different political parties, and we will see a barrage of it coming over and over again. And the political parties will continue to influence the constitution in favor of them. So we are not really sustaining the gains for Bangladesh. I think we all agree that we don't want to go back to the 15 years of despotic regime that we had. Now we are discussing and debating about the way forward. And on that note, I think also I do hear a very common strand here that we need to have let's say, a bare minimum of reforms. Nobody is denying that fact. But what we are all saying is that there has to be a continuity, and for that, political commitment is essential. And also, I mean, I was trying to understand, let's say, as I said, I am a systems expert, so I was looking into the power interest greed. And I was trying to understand, okay, from the power interest greed, who would have the major influence and interest and power to take forward the reforms political agenda. And I was just really struggling here because, let's say, the interim government is a facilitator. So they're trying to do is bring the bodies in who have the power and interest so that it's sustained. Now, is the political party which have the highest power to sustain it, but apparently it has a low interest at this point in time. So you need to move them to a high interest game and then contain their engagement and discuss with them and bring them alongside. And now, if you talk about our people, they have, like Shamur Kappa was also saying, they have low interest and low power at this point in time to influence the reforms, because the only way they can exercise the power is through the election mandate. Now, this is where the importance is. So since the people, they can only exert their power through the election mandate, we need to have the bare minimum reform to ensure that the elections happen every 5 years and they're free and fair, and then every political party, or let's say however the constitution allows the political parties to play in the election, they participate and the people can exercise their voting power. So I believe that's a crucial reform that needs to happen. And that would be my top goal at this point in time for the interim government. And I'll focus on all the institutions that are essential to ensure a free and fair election in let's say in next 6 months or even a year, where there's a consensus for that. So that would be my core focus for the time being. And I would focus on continuity. And like Shamarukapa said, I would not really put these two aside. This is a continuum that we're looking at.
Thank you, Rubaiyat. And over to you, Rashna.
Thank you, Jyoti. So the question being posed is whether reforms need to be completed first before we can proceed with elections. So I have a quick follow-up questions, which is, what are these reforms that we're talking about? Till date, I have no clarity as to exactly what is the mandate of the interim government. I don't want to criticize the interim government. We all made the interim government come true. We all are responsible for giving birth to this government, and we all want this government to succeed. But my point is 7 months have already elapsed, and we have very little clarity as to their mandate. I mean, we do know what is there in the mandate, in that election has to be one of the top priorities. I mean, one of the biggest criticisms leveled against the fascist government was that 3 rigged elections. So elections have to be one of the top priorities and one of the top mandates of this government. There is no dispute over that. That much is very certain. And another thing that is certain is that there is no clarity as to what is the scope of the other reforms that we're talking about. So if we don't know what these reforms are after 7 months having elapsed, what difference is another 7 months or even 2 years going to make? And here, we also have to assess the risk of delaying elections. So if we are to pit reforms against election, and I agree with Shamaruk and Rubaiyat before me, and in fact, all of the panelists, that we cannot pit elections against reforms. If we were to pit elections against reforms, so delaying elections will have no risks whatsoever?
Hold on to that thought, because that's the next question, which is going to come to you.
Yeah.
Or do you want to continue? Okay. Maybe you should continue. Let's continue with that, which is exactly the next question, that constitutional and political implications of delaying elections.
Yeah. So far as delaying elections are concerned, this carries some far-reaching implications. And we are realizing this on a daily basis. So the first implication is that the legitimacy of the interim government is increasingly being questioned for many reasons. See, the legitimacy of the government doesn't come from the Constitution. The written word of the Constitution, it doesn't come from that. It comes from a constitutional law doctrine, which is called the doctrine of necessity. That there was a constitutional vacuum, the prime minister fled the country, wasn't available to discharge her responsibilities. Hence, this crisis gave legitimacy to the government, gave constitutionality to the government. And for the government to continue having its legitimacy, it has to continue carrying on its mandate. We still don't have a clarity as to what that mandate is, other than elections. And also, it has to be effective in discharging its duties. So we have to continuously assess the government's effectiveness as well, because its legitimacy is not based on a written document, but rather a movement or a constitutional crisis. So it has to continue to be effective. Now the question arises, is it continuing to be effective? The law and order situation of the country is not under control. 7 months have elapsed and we see no improvement. So that's the first area of problem. The second is the economy. I mean, I am a corporate commercial lawyer and I have a host of business clients, and most of the big business groups have the same complaint, which is minimal engagement with the business community. So that is another problem that needs to be addressed. And if they can't address, they have to proceed to elections. And foreign investment is another issue. This is not being perceived as a stable government, because it is an interim government at the end of the day. And we need foreign investment if we are to lift the economy. And the economy is the superstructure on which everything depends on. So law and order, economy, and then, of course, increasingly the neutrality of the interim government is being questioned so far as holding elections under it is concerned. See, this is a critical aspect of any interim arrangement Bangladesh has ever had. The whole point of an interim arrangement is that they will be independent, they will be neutral. But the all-out overt support that the interim government is extending to the newly launched party, NCP, is one of the main reasons why their neutrality is being questioned, and rightly so. I mean, the optics are not helping at all. I mean, some of the optics, to name a few, the location of the launch of the new political party. This was Manikmea Avenue in front of the National Parliament. How was this permission given? Why wasn't it given to any other political party? I don't know, for the last 20, 30 years. I may be wrong, but I haven't seen this being given. There was an incident, actually multiple incidents of bus requisition to carry people to the launch event from different districts directly under the instructions of the government. Where are they getting these funding from? The fund to fund fancy iftar parties, to fund an elaborate launch event. These funds are coming from somewhere. If it is business donors, why are the big businesses donating to a new political party? Is it because they are under the impression that this political party is being sponsored by the interim government? If so, that is a perception that is really damaging the credibility of the interim government. And if their credibility gets damaged, it won't be long before the basis on which they stand goes away. So these are some of the concerns I have, for which I think we have to hold elections as soon as possible. Yes, everyone wants reforms. So it's a matter of arriving at some consensus for the moment. If there is consensus on a certain set of reforms, by all means, carry out these reforms and move on to elections. If you fail to establish consensus, then these reforms should be left for an elected government. And in an elected government, I understand people don't have faith in political parties. But if the next election is going to be free and fair, I don't understand where this mistrust comes from. If this interim government can hold a free and fair election, in that case, an elected government will carry on with the reform mandate, as has always been the case. And for reforms to be sustainable, political commitment is critical. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashna. Okay, so Shama has to be excused shortly, so I'm going to ask Shama to make a comment, and then we'll go to Rubaiyat and Mustain.
Thank you, Jyoti, and thank you so much to fellow panelists for considering my situation here. So I will just make a couple of comments, then I have to leave. I apologize in advance. And I will just add a couple of points to what Rashma has said, that, what happens if we delay election? We are missing one point, and we have already discussed what happened in last 15 years. I think Rubaiyat mentioned that somewhere in his discussion, that apathy, voters' apathy. When you don't hold election right in time, we create a tendency in the people to get distracted from practicing their voting rights. And that's dangerous for the state. That's dangerous for democracy. So that's one thing going to happen. If we delay election more and more, we will get a population who are again getting reluctant to practice their voting rights, because they will lose their agency, they will lose their voice in the government. Another point I think that will happen if we delay election, that there might be, space or places where far-right groups can rise. That's something that we need to remember in future, and we have already seen some symptoms, not only symptoms, I think the disease a bit already spread in the country, that we can see the extreme fronts rising their voices. We can see some far-right activist groups organizing themselves. We have even seen that Hizb ut-Tahrir, which is banned, I think, please correct me if I'm wrong, in Bangladesh, they have also run a demonstration in the capital of Bangladesh. I have no clue why in the first place they were allowed to start that demonstration. So these are the things that may happen if we delay elections. It's very important for the interim government to prioritize their task in Bangladesh. It's not like that on 6th August we all wake up and we realize that we need these reforms in all these areas in Bangladesh. It doesn't happen like that. It was a continuous process, and the first weapon to destroy all the state machineries was to stop holding free, fair, inclusive elections. When people's voices are not reflected in the government, these things happen. Let's not make a space again in Bangladesh, so that we don't see the repeat. Thank you.
Thank you, Shama. Then we have Rubaiyat, and then we'll go to Mustain.
I think this is a very powerful and candid discussion. So I thank all my fellow panelists for being very open from their own perspective, professional positions. So one key important issue, I think, is that this interim government is facing is that an identity crisis. Is it a revolutionary government? Is it an interim government? If it's a revolutionary government, of course, it can have its own mandate and say that we don't care. This is essentially what we want to do, and you take it or you leave it. We are a revolutionary government. If it says that we are an interim government, then we do see it as a facilitator. And the point is that when you are assuming a role of a facilitator, you are very mindful of your time, because if you're not mindful of your time, the more time that you take, the more the breaches show up. And the more the breaches show up, the more difficult it gets for you to contain the, let's say, energy. So what we have seen in these last 7 months is that you see there are waves. In the first wave, like people were giving a 4 years, 3 years mandate to this government. And then suddenly all hell broke loose. And then people started to realize maybe this is not what we can really gain. And so let's focus on a political government. And again, in last 1 week, actually, when I was discussing with many of my fellow economists and others in the different groups, they have a kind of a happy mode, like, oh, this interim government is delivering, because I received phone calls from my friends and they were like, please, 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 I mean, write on in favor of this government because they're delivering economic reform. So you see, these are waves and waves, and this will continue. So the point is, let's say if you indulge yourself too much on these kind of waves, then you lose focus on what essentially you want to deliver. So I think the biggest risk that this interim government faces, I would use interim government and a facilitator because that's how I see it as its identity to be. So I think the biggest risk is that if it doesn't give itself a clear mandate that this is the timeline, this is then the essential reform that we want to deliver, and then talk to the people, bring them on board, and then make some changes and amendments to the agenda, but then deliver it, it becomes better for them as an identity, as a realistic mandate for them to achieve. Otherwise, like when they came in, they were not really wanting to give them a timeline. They were like, let's not talk about a timeline. Let's not talk about election. Let's just focus on reform. You cannot deliver a project without having a specific deadline in your head. It's a project. We all agree that this project is about bringing Bangladesh to the tune that delivers a sustainable Bangladesh, where we don't have a despot coming back. We all agree to that. But let's have a timeline in focus, and then let's all work together. And this is not the government's own work. It's the work of the civil society. It's the work of the political parties. It's the work of the private sector. All have to be brought in. If the government is assuming all the burden on its own shoulder, it's going to collapse. It's not going to deliver what it promises to deliver.
Thanks, Rubaiyat. And over to you, Mustain. Thoughts and reflections on what you have heard.
For me, the situation is very difficult because it seems I'm odd man out in the room. And unfortunately,
it's a free country. We are finally a free country, Mustain. We are all pro-democracy. We can all speak our mind.
Yeah, and I have been actually doing things, and I have been trying to survive. So fine, I know how it feels like, as you know. So I do not represent NCP. I'm not a member of it, and I do not represent also the government. So most of the actually questions and criticisms are actually aimed at the government and the NCP and the coalition of their activities and conflict of interest and other things. So they will be in the best position to respond to that. But what I understand is, I think it's not fair to say that what we are discussing, it seems that there is no timeline, there is no kind of at least assurance from the government that when the election will happen. Is it so? Really? Almost every day, every other day, Dr. Yunus is compelled to announce that, yes, we are going to have the election early the December, maximum the March or June, right? This is the timeline. And he has been telling it for the last 4 to 5 months, and he did not change it. And why this kind of repeated concerns and question is coming, I really do not understand. And why we're assuming that there is still a big danger, a looming uncertainty. Dr. Yunus will not be committed. He is doing all sort of things, and he is trying to actually play the things, and he will be bluffing. I really do not understand. And I do not see that anybody in the caretaker government has any kind of indications or actually said anything that may suggest that this government is looking forward a longer timeline, say, for example, 3 to 5 years. No. They are in this government is actually less than 7 months, right? And within 3 months, they announced that the probable timeline, and they have already almost confirmed a very specific timeline. So there is no such thing that I see. We have uncertainty about elections, or elections will be held in the due course, or whether we are going to delay the elections. But the questions of reform is not getting due attention from a very specific political quarters, right? This is also the fact. They are trying to downplay, they're actually questioning the authority of the government. Okay, I have my personal position on this. You may not agree. We are all assuming that Dr. Yunus' government should act like a routine caretaker government, like we had seen before. But the fact is, it is not a routine caretaker government. It came through the upheaval, the uprising, right? We may call it uprising, we may call it a revolutions, but fine. It is something characteristically, fundamentally different government. And the government did not take over in the state that everything was very kind of stable. They had a very smooth transitions, organized police force, judiciary, administrations. You make a few kind of, transfer here and there, then you have a full control over it, and then you just plan for the elections and everything goes smooth, right? This is not the situation that we are in. And the very, very fact that this government is the outcome of a revolution or a mass uprising provides them the legal and political legitimacy and their mandate. We may have a long discussions and debate over it. We can, but this is not the right thing to have here, right? Because this is not the purpose of this forum. But now, whether this government is biased towards a new political force, that is actually the new political force and other to say, I'm not going to make any comment just because they had actually a program in front of Manik Mia Avenue does not suggest actually anything at all. Rather, I don't know whether our international friends will understand this kind of nitty-gritty of our local politics, because that's why actually I didn't want to delve into that territory. We all know in the 64 districts, the DCs and SPs, what is their political affiliation? And how many of them are actually inclined to the new political forces, or will be even thinking that they will be supporting if they have any chance to exert their undue political or institutional power? We all know that. The big question is, the administration is filled by the supporters and affiliates of BNP, supporters and affiliate of JI. So should we call out that without making this change, there will be no level playing field, and we need to have a very radical fresh start of overhauling of the entire administration before we even think of that level of neutrality from the regime? We are not discussing that. This is also unfair. We all know that, right? In every district court, who are the PPs? Where is their political affiliations and commitment lies? It is not the new political party. It is the old political guards. It is the old political powers. So if we want to be fair about the biasness or any likely conflict of interest, I think we should discuss the whole spectrum of it. We do not just pick some convenient examples. And I did not see from Dr. Yunus himself had shown any visible gesture to provide the new political force any support directly coming from the state. Sorry, I didn't see that. You may disagree with me, But yeah, but if you say, okay, this so-called Shamanayaks, the coordinator, the people, they are not actually, of course, they are doing a lot of bad things. They are doing a lot of incorrect things. And this is why it is important for us to raise the flag. It is important for us to voice the concern. It is important for us to mobilize about these wrongdoings, right? In many areas, the extortions, who are the people doing the extortions? And the administration is not acting. Is it because the government is allowing for? Or they're actually helpless because of the broken system, because of this crisis and other thing. So I did not want to go into that direction, but because of this, I thought I should actually clarify my own personal positions. One thing that Shamapa actually said actually resonates very well with me. And I think we should be very serious about that. That, yeah, it is not just 2 months or 1.5 months of the struggle. The struggle was building up in the last 15 or more years. So a lot of people engaged in, especially the political forces. And also during this July monsoon revolutions, they were the critical mass and they're the critical support behind this. But also the fact is that it was not simply because of quota and few students had material interest in it. Why the entire nation actually joined in? Why then it resonated with the entire nation? It is not to just, have a simple election after Sheikh Hasina. It is the yearning of having a democratic systems where the rights will be protected, where we will not see any extrajudicial killing, where we will not see that RAB and other law enforcing agencies are abducting people, and 9 and 8 years they are actually spending their life in the dungeon that Hasina used to manage in her secret prison. These are the things people had in their mind. Therefore, they actually, fought. A good number, because I personally have the scope, and I had been actually engaging these young peoples for years now. So I know a great many of them have the personal memory that while they were kids, while they were school students, while they were college students, they had seen that their relatives, their parents were on the run, were languishing in the jail. And so it was also because of that memory. It was because of that personal, actually, in the bitter experience. It was because of that kind of helplessness that inspired them to fight so hard and give their life. It is not just because once in the morning they actually had seen that someone from the High Court actually dismissed the quota, and they will have now actually squeeze a limited scope of entering into the government job. It is not actually this. So we do not, and we should not actually narrow it down to that. And the most important thing, we should be also honest and fair that the movement also gradually, kind of build up, right? It gradually went rose to the point that it became a serious, significant political demand. And during that time, those who were actually coordinating the movement, the student leaders, they started also talking about the reforms. They started talking about a new political consensus. Why we are forgetting that? It was a categorical demand from that Bangladesh will have to have a new political dispensation. And now we may demand that what they understand about this, what is their specific proposal. While they launched the political party, they said they want to have a radical reform. They want to have a new constitutions. They want to have a new political actually arrangements, these and other things. We may dismiss that, we may not agree that, but we should not just say that it was simply a kind of quota reform movement. That's why we all supported. Now why they're bringing in all these political discussions? I think that would be very unfair. Last but not the least one, saying that the Yunus government is allowing all the fringe and radical elements by choice or by design, I think that is also very unfair. We all know that in Bangladesh, or a country like us, there are a lot of elements, fringe elements. There are a lot of elements, they take advantage of some void, they take advantage of certain situations, and they are taking it. But my larger concern here is, I submit to you, please think about it. The way Sheikh Hasina used to deal with brute force, with any sort of dissents. You may not like different views, you may not like certain strands, but are we going to use brute force? Are we going to securitize and militarize our approach the way Sheikh Hasina did in the pretext of war and terror? Or as long as these are the peaceful, we have to deal with passions and we have to change the behavior and the course. In that regard, Yunus government did really wonderful. Almost every day there are demonstrations, blockade, this and that thing. They have been dealing with passionately, at least more than 100s. Like, I personally do not think that we should quickly resort back to the old habits and old culture of using brute force to deal with different elements, even if they're problematic, even if they're dangerous. If it is not a violent force, patently kind of, terrorist organizations, we have to show the maximum restraints. Human rights should be actually respected, and conduct of the state it should be equal to all other forces. Please do not make this kind of differentiation. It is the danger through which Sheikh Hasina actually built the narrative, and her fascism actually got energy and support from that, creating a particular class within the society, less human, subhuman, problematic, and the brute force can be actually used against that, will actually transport us to the old danger and the old problem. Now, we are not naming it. We are talking about Hizb ut-Tahrir, right? HT. HT is a banned outfit, right? The peculiar thing that we are not discussing is these political forces were operating back from 2003 or 4, right? Sheikh Hasina actually banned it. And the reason of her banning was not very coherent in terms of using this law, the law against the terrorism. So I'm not saying that it was not needed, but the way she did it is also did not actually have all sort of due process and other thing. Now, the question is, this political party was operating all through these years. They were always actually publishing their poster with one simple demand. This is bizarre. The demand of this political party is always asking the military to take over the power. And how they operate. And we are not we are not questioning the deep state. We are suddenly questioning the UNIS government, right? This is not actually suddenly there was, and they were actually silent, or they did not actually show up their face in the last 10 or 12 years. No, it is not the case. They have been always doing it. This time they did demonstrations, and police initially did not act. I don't know why, but later on they dispersed, and there was this kind of confrontation with them. So in the interest of fairness, I'm saying all these things, but what I wanted to say is it will be very difficult to navigate this process, given the kind of dysfunctional systems, given this kind of, completely demoralized police. And with this police, I'm not even quite sure whether the government will, this government or the next government will be able to actually control the law and order situations. That is a different discussions altogether. But it is something very painful and very difficult job to handle with. And because of the challenges, we should not arrive at very quick conclusions. Thank you.
Thanks, Mustain. I'm looking at the time, and we have gone past an hour, and our audience can hopefully appreciate that situation in Bangladesh is quite complex. Okay, so all our panelists were decidedly on the pro-democracy side of things back in July. If we had this event in July, it would have been a very simple conversation that we want the regime to fall, and that's that. Precisely because the regime had fallen, here we are actually grappling with fundamentally difficult issues. Okay. I'm going to ask one more question, and then I'm going to ask probably Ichal to wrap up. Okay. So the question is going to go to Rubaiyat, and then we'll have Mustain and Rashna commenting on it. So public and political stakeholders' stance. What does the public sentiment look like? Rubaiyat.
Yeah, thank you, Jyoti. For the sake of time, I'll try to be very short, but a very important point that I want to make here is that whoever takes an initiative will always face criticism and suggestion, but that does not mean that we disown them and we are critiquing them to bring them down. I think, Mustain bhai, it would be very, very wrong if you think that the panelists here are talking against the interim government. Like you said in your first statement, that we have a golden opportunity and this opportunity will not come again in next century maybe. And we don't want it to come again, actually. We want to seal the moment right now. And we want to ensure that Bangladesh continues building on this. So on that note, let's say we have to all agree that whoever is making any suggestion, they're making the suggestion in good faith for the interim government to move forward to deliver. That's what the agenda is. And if we are trying to, let's say, put us in a position that I'm taking an initiative and therefore people are being unfair, then I would say that that is what that defense begins to then let's say cripple scene and then creates the first seed of a despot to rise because they can't withstand anything, any suggestion coming in their way. So that is something that we need to be very mindful of, that we are all trying to deliver together. On that note, I would just try to elaborate on what we are hearing from the people from our poll. And I was asked this question a lot of times, like, why did we plot the results and the processes on the same question frame? As I said, I'm a researcher and I'm a systems change expert. Now I know, let's say we are disaggregating them, we will get results that probably would look good on both sides. But point
Just
is,
to note, Rubaya, that the audience might not be aware of the poll. So just back
okay,
a
sorry.
little bit.
So
Yes.
in Innovation, we did a national poll on people's election polls, where we tried to capture what people are thinking of about the interim government's performance and also what people's expectations are with regards to future government and the reform processes. So one of the questions that we had was about, let's say, a shopping list of reform agenda and also outcome agenda. And what we saw is that people were prioritizing their employment growth, the law and order situation, the price hike situation. So the economic and social indicators were being prioritized by the people, while the reform agenda, like constitutional reform, electoral reform, those were coming a bit, let's say, on the tail end. But we also asked whether the government was delivering or is delivering on this reform agenda and what. And across all strands, they were saying that their expectations were being partially met. Now, no government will be able to deliver fully met solutions. That's impossible. So we try to see whether the partially met spectrum is large enough. So what we are seeing is that the partially met spectrum is not large enough. It's about hovering around, let's say, 30%, 20%. So, but the point here is, critical point here is, and that's not only for the interim government, that's for all the governments in the future for Bangladesh to take note of, is that people care about results. They don't really care about processes. These are difficult things for them to comprehend. How did the government deliver it? It's very difficult for a common person to understand. They go out and they go for a bazaar, they're shopping, and then if they cannot buy the food, that's what they, let's say, I can't buy my food, or I don't have a job. That's what their, their focus is on. So not only this government, but also for the future government, the message is very clear that your reform agenda has to be directly related to the results that the people are looking at. We are kind of showing what results people are looking at. They're looking at the social indicators and the economic indicators. Now, knowing the fact, let's say if you are delivering certain reforms that is delivering these outcomes, then people will appreciate. And that's exactly what we have seen over the last 1.5 weeks or so. Beginning of the Ramadan too, that the government was able to contain the price, which essentially we did not see for a long time. The government was able to deliver some kind of, let's say, we are seeing good remittance, we're seeing some of the, let's say, macroeconomic indicators improving, and there's lots of appreciation from the people. So it shows that across all brackets, irrespective of income segments, people are looking at results. That does not mean that we're going to let go of reforms. But what it means is that only reform without focus on results, short-term, mid-term, and long-term, we are not going to win people's hearts. That's it.
Thanks, Rubaiyat. Mustain and Rashna. Mustain, are you there?
Shall I go first?
Yes.
Or Rashna may come first?
No, that's fine. Please go ahead.
Okay. So actually, I fully agree with you. We should be very watchful. We should criticize whatever kind of wrong things the government is doing, and whether any sort of conflict of interest that we see. And we have to start building this democratic culture, accountability, and transparency fast. We should not wait for the new government to start this, right? So definitely, this is what it is. and they should start from here. I had no intention to defend anyone. I was just actually putting some other perspective into it. Even though I said it very clearly, I do not represent them. I have no interest to defend them. They are in the best position to do it. They have a spokesperson. There are other things. But for our international audience and those who are now actually listening this, so it may help them to put things in perspective. But I want to share in other important things for our democratic future, for our actually the long and the big picture of it is, say in the last 15 years, what really happened? The government did not, or the Sheikh Hasina did not allow election to happen. You know, I'm coming from a kind of left background. And during early 2000, we used to think that election is something that really provides license to BNP and Awamu League to plunder and loot the country. It has no other value. It was simply my understanding and the value. And Jyotiba, you know that how the left thinks, right? It was actually after 2014, I came to realize that even though it is a weak, fragile, but functioning electoral democracy, you have the most fundamental thing for a modern society, which is the balance. You have a balance, you have a moderation, because even the party, even the most corrupt one knows very well that he will have to go to the people. He may not be in the office, he may be voted out, so he cannot do certain things beyond certain, red line. Destroying election basically destroyed that social organic balance and the equilibrium of a society. Now, why I'm saying it? It is not just because of certain personal realization, because it is something that we need to now regain and rebuild. But now I see very actually important problem for us. By force, Sheikh Hasina did a one-sided election. It was her party and her loyalists in the parliament, right? She had the brute majority. Now, of course, people may vote a political party, they can win all of the seats, but that is not what we can control. But we need to have this discussion. Are we going to see a parliament where only one political party brutally dominate, and whether that will be the best in the interest of our democracy and building a kind of vibrant, balanced political landscape and culture? I am very apprehensive of this. And I think that there should be larger political discussions on how we avoid that pitfalls. The second thing is, are we going to see a very competitive elections coming forward? If we do not see a very competitive elections, which means again, then the people will not have competing and credible choices. If people do not have competing and credible choices, what will be the outcome? The outcome will be a void, a danger that we will be facing. I'm more actually concerned about those things, how we can actually do certain kind of political consensus, understanding and reform so that we can avoid that pitfalls for our nations. By far, democracy is the best national security deterrence for us. Whatever we have seen in our history, all three regimes were actually authoritative, were backed by our neighbors, and they actually undermine our national interests and our national sovereignty. It was always imposed upon us through that process. And now, if without that, we are going to face a kind of some level of this kind of autocratic authoritarian regime because of this, by default, brute majority. And if we are not being able to work out a better solution for us through consensus, through political wisdom and kind of, collective agreement, I really think that we will be facing another wave of problems and we will not have a better outcome and better result for our future in democracy. Thank you.
Thanks, Musnain and Rashna.
Thank you, Jyoti. Is there anything particular you'd like me to start with, or should I just go all out and address everything that was raised?
Go all out and address everything, because this probably would be the last, we're looking at the time, so this probably would be the last chance to speak. So
thank you. Thank you. So the first thing that I'd like to clarify, like Rubaiyat has done when he started, is that the criticisms leveled at the interim government, these are not just personal opinions. These are also widely held perceptions that we are all talking about. What I said about neutrality of the interim government, this is not something I just made out of thin air. And the neutrality is being questioned not only because of the location of the launch event of NCP, it is also being questioned because the leader of the NCP just resigned the other day and became the leader of the NCP. He was in cabinet. 2 of the student advisors are still in cabinet. So there are many, many examples that can be raised, that can be, we can talk about it, which question the neutrality of the interim government. And what is a little concerning is that the interim government till date has not addressed this at all. This is a concern that is being raised very widely, yet it is not being addressed. I mean, they are busy congratulating NCP on all of their social media platforms, advisors of the interim government, key officials of the interim government. I haven't seen these congratulatory remarks about any other party. So what are they trying to do? If DCs belong to a particular party or PPs belong to a particular party, does that mean the interim government has assumed the agenda to level the playing field by sponsoring a party? See, these are concerns that are being raised, and these concerns need to be addressed. I'm not saying for a single second that I have doubts about the intention of the interim government, but these are legitimate concerns, and these concerns are based on optics, things that we're seeing. So these have to be addressed by the interim government. If we are to be, if the concerns are to be addressed, then of course there will be more credibility to the interim government moving forward, and credibility is critical. We intend to hold national elections under this government. So this government has to go all out and prove to everyone that they are still as credible as they were after the 5th of August. So that is something that I wanted to mention. The second aspect of the mandate of the interim government, Mustain pointed out that the mandate of the interim government is not something as simple as election. I just wanted to say that election is not that simple. We have not had elections. Last 3 elections were completely rigged. For many years, we have not been able to exercise our right to vote. And the significance of elections in a democracy should not be undermined. And I'm not saying that Mustain did it. What I'm saying is that the debate that is now taking place, NCP is saying elections after reforms, elections after justice. This undermines the significance of elections in a democracy. We are still a democracy. So if the elections are free and fair, people have the right to choose who they want to be in power. So let's not undermine the significance of elections. And another debate, I believe we haven't touched on this, and since I come from the legal community, is justice before elections. And this is something that boggled my mind, which is, what is justice? If they are referring to the trial process, then from the beginning till the end, this is going to take years. This is a lengthy process, be it before the regular criminal courts, be it before the International Crimes Tribunal. And we don't want these trials to be rushed, because we don't want the convictions to be questionable. We want these convictions to be beyond controversy. Unlike the convictions before the International Crimes Tribunal during the Awami League regime, which were highly condemned and very, very questionable. So we don't want to repeat the same mistake. We want the perpetrators of the fallen regime to be brought to justice. And for that, we cannot wait for years and not hold elections for justice. People who are raising this demand either do not have a clue about how long the trial process takes, or they have some ulterior motive, which could be to establish their own political party. And they are getting all sorts of help from everywhere. So these are some very difficult questions that we have to address and think about. And the last thing that I wanted to is, see, one question is that if elections take place, then one particular party will have a landslide victory. And so we have to somehow carve out a mechanism to ensure competition. How can we wait till then? Are we going to wait for 10 years for 10 political parties to establish themselves so that they can actually compete with this one particular party? So I personally feel this is unrealistic, that we hold off elections, which is critical to a democracy, for in the name of reforms. Till date, we don't know exactly what reforms, what is the mandate, in the name of justice, which is going to be time consuming, and it should not be rushed. And lastly, to increase competition in the market. So these are just some of the concerns that I had. And moving on to something less controversial and more in line with what I do, which is, see, the timeline of the interim government. Unfortunately, the Constitution does not provide for a timeline, as we are all aware by now. The closest parallel that we had was the non-party caretaker government system, which clearly this government is not. And that was for 90 days. And another example that we can draw upon is the Fakhruddin Moin caretaker government, which again was extra-constitutional. And its legitimacy, there are many questions about its legitimacy. That was there for 2 years. So we don't really have a parallel to be guided by. However, since the legitimacy of this government comes from the movement, comes from the constitutional crisis that gave birth to the government, obviously the tenure also can come from the same constitutional principles, which is for as long as they carry the mandate that was given to it, as long as they continue to effectively discharge with independence and neutrality the functions of its functions. So all of these things have to be considered when we talk about how long they should be here. So just to repeat, because these are important issues. One is the mandate given to it. We don't have a clear idea yet. Second is, are they still effectively discharging the duties with which they took oath? And third is, are they still neutral? So their effectiveness has to be measured or assessed continuously based on these reference points. And I think I'd finish there and not take up too much time. Thank you.
Thank you, Rashna. We do have one observation, and I'm going to read out the observation, but I'm not going to actually hold a discussion on it because we have gone well beyond an hour that we said we were going to take. The observation is from the audience or one of the someone who had joined, and it's that straightforward definition of a tangible reform. It involves banning the Awami League either for life or for a minimum of 3 election terms. Okay, so as we know, Awami League was the party that had been ousted by the popular uprising. They were the party that rigged 3 elections in a row and committed horrible human rights violation and so on. So that's an observation. We wouldn't have time to go into that. What I heard from all panelists, and I thank them for their very frank and candid observations, is that for any reform to be sustained, there has to be consensus among the pro-democracy forces, not just the political parties, but also civil society, of reform groups, of rights groups, and so on. Just reflecting on our own history, we had been at similar junctures 3 times in the past. In 1946-47, when we had an election, and then the British and the Indian Congress and Muslim League failed to reach any accommodation, and we had horrendous partition riots and partition. And then we had an election in 1970, and the Pakistan Army and the Nationalist Awami League Party and the West Pakistani politicians failed to reach any consensus after the election. And we had the brutal war that led to the creation of Bangladesh. In 1990-91, in contrast, we did have an election, and political parties reached a consensus and transitioned to not a very good, not a very mature, not a very robust democracy, but at least for next 10, 15 years, we had 3 elections in a row that were relatively free and fair. So our own history offers us, very much a mixed precedents. Okay, so we had elections in the past, and then we have a mixed history of consensus after the election. Will this time be any different? With that question, I think I'm going to draw it to a close. We hope that our regional audience outside Bangladesh has had some ideas about what's going on in Bangladesh and how this may shape their own struggles to build better democracy across the region. So I thank Asia Democracy Network for allowing us the platform. I thank all the panelists for their frank and candid discussion. And again, we are having this discussion. I think that's the important thing, because 12 months ago, none of this would have been possible. None of this would have been even thinkable, imaginable. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
you,
you.
everybody. Thank you all.
Everyone.